All right, man. This is episode number 80 of the Cozy Corner of Cinema. This is being recorded on a beautiful, chilly autumn day on Monday, October 9th, 2023 at 3:18 p.m. It is such a sight to see outside. The leaves have almost completely engulfed the grass. There's, just a beautiful chill in the air. It's the perfect weather that, you get in the house, you get in your cozy clothes, man, you get your slippers on, you just totally embrace yourself in your surroundings, in the atmosphere. It's just beautiful kind of cozy weather that really makes you aware of your surroundings, man. Makes you more aware of, now that we're out of the summer, now the heat's gone, we're bundling up. We're getting ourselves cozy, getting ourselves in for the night. Winter's going to be with us soon, so it's going to be darker earlier. It's the perfect weather just to stay in and to read or to watch a film or anything that you feel like will add to that cozy kind of mentality, man. It's what we're all about here on the show, man. I mean, the show is called the Cozy Corner of Cinema because it's all about spreading the cinematic joy, to you, the listener, as well as just a total cozy atmosphere, kind of like a fireplace sort of mentality. Just being by the fire, a hot beverage in front of you, it's just I love this time of the year, man. It's just absolutely astonishing. You go out there, you just see that the trees themselves are painted with a variety of colors of oranges and yellows, of the greeneries around. It's truly a sight to behold that you have to just kind of see for yourself in person, man. You can look at many a beautiful photograph, and those are all great and all that, but when you're actually in it and when you're experiencing it, it's something else. Whether that's why you want to take the opportunity to go out there, go for a walk, go for a drive. Maybe you're out and you're listening to your favorite music or listening to a podcast or whatever it is. Maybe you're listening to nothing at all. You're just embracing yourself in the surrounding kind of noise and just allowing yourself to be immersed in the atmosphere. There's no wrong way to do it, man. Just don't waste the opportunity while you still have the time, man. Because next thing you know, it's going to be winter. We're going to be, winter's perfect weather and opportunity to stay inside, man. You don't want to be going out there and risking, an accident, driving on slippery roads, and for what, man? To go out there and do nothing, to socialize and do all that nonsense, man. It ain't worth it, But however, you do you do your life the way you want to do it. You find whatever it is, that cozy mentality that keeps you going, that keeps you moving forward, and whatever that might be, man. There's no wrong way to do it as long as you're not hurting yourself or anybody else. You got to find that kind of cozy center of yourself and chase after it, man, because it certainly ain't gonna be chasing after you. Oh man, all right. Let's get right into some stuff I want to talk about today. I heard the other day, tragically, that the director Terence Davies has passed away, and I'll be the first to tell you that I am not as familiar with his filmography as I'm aware of his filmography. Let me rephrase that. I'm aware of his filmography. I just have not seen many of his films. I've only seen two of his films. His film from 1992, The Long Day Closes, which is definitely one of the strongest films that I've seen this year, and his final film from 2021, Benediction, which I thought was pretty good as well. I wasn't quite in love with it, but it's also the first of his work that I had seen. He has passed away, and I don't normally talk about everybody who passed away and all that. And the only people I've really mentioned, really that I've devoted a lot of time to was probably Mike Shank and Ruggiero Deodato, for personal reasons. But it kind of leads me into the first kind of thing I want to talk about today, because I had read a book. Last year or 2 years ago, I was going over a handful of filmmakers and their work and sort of, analyzing some of their work. And Terence Davies is one of the filmmakers listed in this book, and one of the other filmmakers has a new short film out, which has been getting some talk. Filmmaker Pedro Almodovar, who has his new film out, which I have seen, from 2023 with Ethan Hawke and Pedro Pascal, and the name of that film is Strange Way of Life. This is his newest film. Not a feature film. This is playing theatrically right now on a double bill with his 2020 short film, The Human Voice, which has Tilda Swinton in it as the primary and really only character in the film. Besides some, I guess, only character that we really see on screen besides a couple of people in a department store sort of area. But both these films are about a half hour each, and I would recommend that if you get the opportunity to see these theatrically, to stick around after The Human Voice, because the first one that plays A Strange Way of Life, then The Human Voice plays, and there's been no mention of it, but afterwards is a really solid, about 20 or 30 or so minute interview with Almodovar, where he primarily talks about Strange Way of Life, talks about influences on it, his kind of what he was going for on that, sort of some contemporary westerns that he drew some inspiration from, films like Power of the Dog and The Rider. It was great to hear him mention The Rider. If you've listened to the show, you know how much I love that film. And he talks about some other kind of contemporary westerns and sort of what he was kind of going for. Sort of, Almodovar is somebody who really it breaks down a lot of the human kind of what's what I'm looking for. Relationships that humans have with one another, for the most part, primarily from female sort of point of views, and the when it comes to the male kind of characters, their relationships with the females, and maybe not necessarily romantic, but more so in how they affect their lives, and this is one where, because you have two primary male leads, you have Ethan Hawke and Pedro Pascal, who, because it's a short film, I almost don't even really want to go into it too much, because there is really kind of two big dialogue sequences, man. Almodovar talks about in the interview how he mainly wrote this dialogue sequence about two. I don't really want to say, because I really think, not that it's a spoiler or anything like that. It's only about 30 minutes, but I think the way that you take in the film will be important, rather than me just kind of explaining what happens over the course of the 30 minutes. But basically, he wrote that dialogue exchange and then kind of built on it from there. And the thing with this film is that I'm enjoying it a lot. I think Ethan Hawke and Pedro Pascal are two really terrific actors, and there's a couple other actors in this film you have who I'm not familiar with these actors, so I do apologize. We have like Sarah Salamo, Manu Rios, Jason Fernandez, Jose Condesa. They have small parts here and there, but the thing with this film, which it's kind of a double-edged sword in terms of a compliment and a detriment, is that I was really enjoying this for what was going on, and I would have no problem with being a short, but I was kind of, and I think the audience was as well, sort of taken aback at the abruptness of the ending, because when the film cuts, the credits almost immediately come up, and I think it's kind of jarring in a way where it doesn't feel like a natural end to this sort of situation. It kind of just feels like time is up, like you have X amount of time. And I was watching this and I'm thinking, why was this not stretched out to a feature? Because, which is a compliment to the film itself, because I think the back and forth between the characters Jake and Silva, played by Pedro Pascal and Ethan Hawke, they work so well off each other, and I really like their dialogue exchanges off one another, and sort of the moral conundrum that really comes from their characters, that by not doing more with it, it was kind of the ultimate tragedy. And Almodovar does talk about not exactly why it wasn't stretched out to a feature, but for one, what would have happened next in the story with these characters and how it all ultimately would have resolved, but two, also why he wanted to keep it at just a 30 minutes. Now, for The Human Voice with Tilda Swinton, I get why it's a 30-minute short. It plays off of I think somewhat inspired by a Jean Cocteau play, which I'm not familiar with. It's primarily just this conversation that Tilda Swinton is having on this phone, on this sound stage, in these different kind of interior spaces. She has this dog with her, and I'm sure people who are more familiar with the Jean Cocteau play or work that this is based off of will be able to draw a stronger connection than I was, because I really had no sort of base of reference. But with The Strange Way of Life, I think that he could have, what he was trying to do with it, I totally understand why, because I remember hearing about this film at, I don't know when it was. It was when it played at a festival last year or so, and or maybe when it was even in production, I really don't know. But I remember Almodovar talking about this film, man, and he was talking about this was kind of his version of Brokeback Mountain, or I don't even know if it was a response to Brokeback Mountain, but basically that was a film that was in the conversation of this, and I didn't totally get what he meant by that, but then watching this film, I really get what he was trying to go for, with these two characters, and sort of the qualms that both of them have with not only each other, but the situation they kind of find themselves in a bit of a triangle in terms of not only their personal relationships, but also something bigger going on. And I think that where he's talking about where the film would have went would have been a very, very interesting way of doing it because, because Almodovar is a filmmaker whose leads are almost entirely always female, by having these two male characters is such a interesting sort of take that I really would have liked to have seen a full feature of this. And Almodovar is a filmmaker who I haven't seen all of his work, but all of his work that I have seen, I have liked. That book doesn't go through any of his shorts. It goes up to, at that point, goes up to 2013, it came out, I don't know when the book came out, it's in the other room, but that his newest film at the time was his 2013 film, I'm So Excited, which was actually, to my knowledge, is probably his least well-received film to date. And it's interesting that book, when that book came out, that a couple of years later, his film Pain and Glory from 2019 would be one of his most beloved films to date. I'm looking through his filmography now, and the films that I've seen, just to run through really quick, I've seen... Let me make sure. Okay, for his directorial work, the films that I've seen are Matador, Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, All About My Mother, The Skin I Live In, Pain and Glory, and then his newest three, The Human Voice, Parallel Mothers, and Strange Way of Life. And I like all those films to one extent or another. Obviously, I like some more than others. My favorite of his work, undoubtedly, to me, is unquestionably Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown. I think that's such a smartly written and just a really great, almost stage play in a will. If you will, I think it was also actually based off of Jean Cocteau work as well. But you have, the three leads in that film and kind of the situations that they get themselves into. That's all taking place really in this one apartment. And I don't know if this was his first work that he did with Antonio Banderas that he collaborated with a lot. I believe they had a falling out at one point, and then they were able to kind of get back together. And obviously with Antonio Banderas being in Pain and Glory from 2019, where he's playing, it's been a couple years I've seen it, but I believe he's playing basically a version of Almodovar, except for him or another character in that film, and kind of looking back on his career as a famous filmmaker, but also his relationship with his mother when he was a young kid, and obviously you can see sort of the somewhat autobiographical nature of it. I've not read into that film as much as I probably would have benefited, but from seeing it initially. But the thing is that with all of his work, his perspective on a lot of these situations, they like any real great artist, or like many great artists, I should say, is that they come from putting themselves into their writings or their films or their artworks, not necessarily an autobiographical work, but you take these elements that Almodovar maybe has, his relationship with his mother or the people in his life, and I remember. And sometimes with a lot of filmmakers that can be oftentimes misinterpreted, or they put themselves almost maybe too much into the films that people reject that in a way where I see that happen with certain filmmakers where they put a lot of their ideas, a lot of these darker kind of elements, or a lot of the maybe unclean sort of elements they put into their films, and people are quick to maybe reject that on a shallow kind of surface level. I look at a filmmaker like, one of my favorite filmmakers, Lars von Trier, and sort of the controversies that his films get into, where they say about like the violence, or they say that it's misogynistic or anything like that. And to me, I think that's a very shallow and very trite kind of point of view, man. It's sort of like, for one, him specifically as an artist, because he makes such what can be shocking, films. He makes very sexually explicit films. Very the violence can be very explicit. It can sort of provoke uncomfortable reactions. Where you have a film like The House That Jack Built, which you're dealing with horrific, explicit violence. Then you have these really sort of goofy, silly moments that and I love that film. That made my top 10 of 20. What list did I do? Was that in the 2021 list? I don't remember. Was that the 2018 list? Gosh, man. Yeah, that had to be in the 2018 list. But I love that film. But I remember, and this was when I was still, at a certain point, I just stopped reading any kind of reviews online. I was getting so frustrated, and I was thinking, like, what am I doing this to myself for? There's just certain films where I'm just like, man, you're just getting the wrong idea from this. But, it's people's own opinion. They're entitled to their opinion. But I'm just like, I'm just more interested in what my acquaintances, whose opinion I trust, that whether or not they strongly agree or strongly disagree on a film, I at least have some sort of perspective to gain from, rather than just a nameless, or not even nameless, but I should say just some random text in the void. But I was just seeing his work get kind of unfairly treated, and getting just these really shallow kind of interpretations from that. When a filmmaker kind of puts themselves into their work, and when they get these sort of reactions, it can be kind of off-putting, I imagine, to them, where it's sort of like, they put themselves into this work, and they kind of use their, the positive or negative elements of their life into something creative like art, and then it's kind of shunned away. It's sort of, I imagine, can be very off-putting and very disheartening. But what's interesting is, as going back to before, with Almodovar talking about sort of his, in the interview after both the films, he talks about sort of the influences with the some of the westerns he was talking about. He talks about his love of some of the John Ford stuff. He's not big on spaghetti westerns, but he loves the Leone stuff. He loves some of the Corbucci films, and you can definitely see where it's coming from. Where he talks about sort of all these kind of male driven films, but he wanted to get kind of a more emotional, tender, romantic relationship with a lot of these men, who are in these films where it's just them and all that. And it's an interesting point of view, because you don't really see it that often. And it's interesting the sort of recent westerns he brought up all happen to be directed by women that got at sort of these more emotional sort of viewpoints. I forgot the third film that he mentioned. I do apologize. Because he mentioned The Power of the Dog, The Rider, and one other film that I do not remember the name of it all. It was First Cow by Kelly Reichardt, which I haven't seen yet. I really actually wanted to see that film, which is funny. And when I was thinking about what the film he had mentioned, I was like, okay, I think he mentioned a Kelly Reichardt film, and I'm like, okay, did he mention Meek's Cutoff? I don't think it was that one. And then First Cow, and I haven't seen First Cow, but The Rider is a contemporary set western. So I mean, it takes place. I forgot where it takes place, but it's not. When I say western, it's not. It's something closer to like maybe a Taylor Sheridan sort of work, like Hell or High Water or Wind River, or even something like Yellowstone, which I've never seen, but Almodovar sort of mentions that he's a fan of that work, but his issues that he had with the show, that he wanted to kind of step away from, getting a more kind of human, emotional sort of resolution. But that kind of leads me into the next point I wanted to bring up, and actually, I forgot to grab the book from before, so if you can hear me, I'm on the other side of the room. Got to get this book here. Pulling it out. Oh, gosh, man. All right. I could edit around this, but I'm not gonna, so just bear with me for a moment. But one of the filmmakers that he had mentioned, and sort of their work, which I feel like belongs in the higher echelon of great American westerns, and truly, when you talk about the great American westerns, there are many, many that come to mind. I'm sure, you have plenty like Stagecoach, The Searchers, Rio Bravo, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, all these just phenomenal, Red River. It goes on and on. But of course, when you think of American westerns, one of the names that has to come up undoubtedly is the great Sam Peckinpah. And this film that I am currently in the middle of, which has been taking up all of my time in terms of my reading, has been this book that's copywritten, I should say, from, what year is this? I think it's 1994. That's right, copyright 1994. You always want to look up the copyright on that, not when it was published, because that could be very misleading. If you're looking at it when something is published, and like say, because there's this one of the a project that I'm working on, I was having some difficulty finding the actual date that a book was released, because it kept showing me the reissue. So it was saying it was a book from the technically the late 50s, but actually into the 60s, 70s, and it was giving me 2015, 2016. It's like, no way, man, that's not it. But this book written by David Weddle, If They Move, Kill 'Em: The Life and Times of Sam Peckinpah. And it's appropriate that I read this, because I just recently read, and I won't get up into the other room, but I did just recently read the book on the making of The Wild Bunch, which I believe is a newer book as well. I can look here on Amazon and see, because it's a contemporary book, when the release date was. So it says first edition of this was in February 12th, 2019, and the full title of this book is The Wild Bunch, Sam Peckinpah, A Revolution in Hollywood, and the Making of a Legendary Film. And that book was written by W.K. Stratton. which is also a very good book as well, and is required reading with this being in the conversation. But this has been such a terrific read so far. It's funny, I was talking about on last episode, I picked up Pure Filth, which I've been trying to find for a while, and it's still been sitting here, man. I got it right here, actually. That'll be next up to read, but I've been so enthralled with this book. It's a fairly long book, man. It's about, I mean, the final page here is about 561, so not too bad. That Norman Mailer book I read was about 900 pages, and that took me about 2 months to get through. As well, was a terrific book. I highly recommend that, Norman Mailer, A Double Life. Really fantastic look into a complicated man. And much in the same way of that, this is also a really interesting and loving and critical look into Peckinpah as a person, of course, and as a filmmaker. Right now, I'm about halfway through the book. I'm just at the point when the Wild Bunch is really getting its footing, how it was initially brought up from a different idea, or brought up from a different work that he was going to do while he was rewriting the Diamond story, and that eventually got morphed into this. But with this book is that the way that David Weddle writes it, you can tell he really loves Peckinpah, and at the same time he is not afraid to show his very ugly side of him, the complicated relationship that he had with the women in his life, and especially in his family. And what I was saying before when it came to a filmmaker like Lars von Trier is that, when he puts sort of his ideas, maybe sort of his inner workings into these films that come out in sort of this harsh way, how quickly it can be rejected and how quickly it can be shunned as being something much more shallow than it actually is. And what David Weddle does so greatly is he talks about sort of these personal feelings that Peckinpah has that he puts into his work, his ideas of the women in his life and the love in his life, and sort of the idea of really kind of sticking to your guns, man, and really kind of standing your ground on your morals, but also the idea of a changing sort of time, not solely with the Wild Bunch, but at this point up, the work of like Ride the High Country, which is really like sort of you're not needed anymore. It's like you're. I mean, you look at the tagline for the Wild Bunch, and from memory, it's out of touch, and running out of time. Obviously horribly paraphrased, but this idea of just everything around you is moving, and where do you go from there? And the Wild Bunch does that exceptionally. That's a late period Western where it's sort of just like, the Mexico is changing. These bounty hunters, these criminals really are changing, man. And the world is not going to wait for them. They're a dying breed. So it's sort of like, what are you going to do with your morals, man? Are you going to try to hold on to this idea of a different kind of past? Or are you going to like really stay on your feet and fight for something worth fighting for? And that's why, I'm not going to spoil anything, but when you get to that third act, the Wild Bunch, on a purely kind of on a shallow level, yes, it's a brilliant third act. This book talks about the way that Peckinpah edits and how he was doing, compared to a lot of his contemporaries or a lot of the great titans of the genre, of the John Fords and the Howard Hawks, who, in their westerns, they would have these kind of long kind of shots that, there was not a lot of room to really mess with the edit because you couldn't really rearrange those shots that way. Whereas Peckinpah was very adamant in something like Ride the High Country, where he has a lot of quick cuts between the action, and he can go through and just kind of pick and trim what he wants. And they talk about with this longtime editor saying like, "Oh, this is uneditable. I can't do anything with it." But him being so meticulous and being sort of this focused kind of artist, he really was able to make something so impressive that through all his ups and downs, getting at this point hired, or getting on this point to do the Wild Bunch, they can still come back and be like, okay, well, this guy did Ride the High Country, because the book talks about, going into Ride the High Country and, working on like television before and all that, and then going into Major Dundee and the incredibly troubled production that had, and the film being taken away from him and re-edited, and the lying to the press about I'm sorry, like later on, we're talking about the Cincinnati Kid when he got fired from that and lying to the press about why he got fired. It's a whole big thing because Peckinpah, I mean, is a very complicated guy. He's one of these guys who can be very cruel and verbally abusive and just be a real just like son of a gun man. But then he can be very kind and caring and be very loving. And they talk about this the whole part where he was sending money to these kids overseas and he was spending like hundreds and hundreds of dollars on this man, and he's just going back and forth of just the complicated marriages and all that. And that's why with these kind of filmmakers, I don't know how much they can really exist anymore while still given the kind of free reign to do the kind of films that they want, man. Because even though, they talk about the studio is basically turning their backs on him after Major Dundee, but then he does Noon and Wine, and that sort of gets their attention again, and it's sort of like he can come back and start to do other stuff, but then he's kind of being, people are still kind of, worry about him. And it's, very much in the same way of something like, a book I talked about a while ago, the Michael Cimino book, talking about how, Cimino was this guy who, he was a very smart guy. He worked on Silent Running, and then he does The Deer Hunter, which gets all these awards, and is a brilliant film, but then he's just like, it's in a parallel to The Wild Bunch, man. It's like sort of this guy in a changing time where it's not the new Hollywood anymore, man. I mean, he's there's this wild production of Heaven's Gate. It's not solely just him, man. The book does a lot of arguments about how United Artists was at fault on a lot of this too. But my point being is that you can't have an artist like Peckinpah, like Kubrick, these kind of I don't even want to say wild cards, they're going to do something crazy, but these very focused, kind of meticulous filmmakers and artists who end up producing these really exceptional works that end up kind of changing the landscape. They talk about with Ride the High Country how you had all these westerns that were just blending together and were very kind of the same sort of cowboys and Indian story. But when you have a film like Ride the High Country, which is far more character driven and far more emotional, that really shines above kind of the and a lot of the films that a lot of the westerns that were kind of made like on a on a factory line. Hey, a lot of them are good, man. I'm not putting down any films, but ultimately, what are you really getting out of it emotionally? Which is probably not it really depends on a film by film basis. I really can't say for sure, but just a visionary like Peckinpah doing these sorts of films, and of course he would go on to do many brilliant films, man. I think I'm close to have seen all of his films. I think the only two, actually, like Almodovar, I'm gonna run through because I think there are only two that I haven't seen. I'm sorry, actually three that I haven't seen, but to my knowledge, I've seen the rest of his films. So let me just run through these really quick. And I'm talking about feature films, not any of his shorts or any of his TV stuff. Or I'm sorry, any of his TV stuff, I should really say. So The Deadly Companions I haven't seen. That was actually his first film. I forgot the story with that. I think he was just hired for that film. It wasn't entirely his. But Ride the High Country is really kind of his first, real Peckinpah film. Then he would do Major Dundee, which I've seen. The Wild Bunch, which I've seen. Ballad of Cable Hogue I've seen, Straw Dogs I've seen, Junior Bonner I've seen, The Getaway I've seen, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, which I haven't seen, but I actually currently have recorded on TCM, so that'll be watched very soon. I actually almost I got another film I gotta watch before that, and then that's up next. Let's see. Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, which I've seen, The Killer Elite, which I've seen. Cross of Iron, which I haven't seen. That's getting a 4K soon. Somebody waiting for that. Convoy, which I've seen, and then his final work, The Osterman Weekend, which I haven't seen. So all of the films I've seen that I've mentioned, I like, man. I think my least favorite of his work is definitely Convoy, but I think there is definitely good stuff in there. I think Ernest Borgnine plays a really solid villain as well, and I actually do like that film. I don't think it's bad, or I really don't think it's that bad, or I think that, but interesting the way that they talk about even early on The Cincinnati Kid, which by Norman Jewison, which is a film that I absolutely love. Steve McQueen, Tuesday Weld, Edward G. Robinson, and Margaret. That's just a really, really great film. But they talk about how they were really going for a different idea with that film and how he wanted to do something a little bit darker and grittier, and how he only really shot one part of the film that they, basically lied to the media about. That's why he got fired, and they redid the whole thing, and he was furious about it. I would have loved to have seen his version of the film, but I think that's the case where we actually got a brilliant film out of it. And actually, funny enough, he was if things would have worked out, I won't go into the whole thing, but he would have almost been a runner up to a front runner, I should say, to direct Butch Cassidy. But that's a different story altogether. But anyways, I'm running out of time here. I got less than a minute, so I'll just say enjoy the beautiful autumn weather. Don't waste it. It's shining down beautifully right now. We got a beautiful breeze in the air. Make yourself a hot beverage. Get a good book. Make sure you're getting in the time to follow your dreams and passions, man, because we're wrapping up almost the end of the year. So when the end of the year comes, you're going to want to look back and wonder, what did I accomplish this year? You know, and that's only for you to judge whether it was a year wasted or a year treated, rightly. All right. Thanks, guys, for listening. Take care. I'll be back next time. All the best.